Jesus dials up the pressure. What you thought was kind of fulfilling the minimum basic requirements is not really what it looks like to love your neighbor. So if we're going to love our neighbors, it means we kind of have to take a step beyond just the mere obligations and take it a step further into love.
So one of the first question I have for you is, could you help us understand the shock value of the story of the Good Samaritan? So Jesus answers this lawyer who asks the question, who is my neighbor? Kind of break that down for us a little bit.
Yeah, so it's a lot of fun to join you for some talk today, and especially talking about a theme that I really appreciate and God's really burdened my heart, particularly in the area of discipleship, and then connecting discipleship to kind of our broader social responsibilities. What does discipleship mean for how I relate to others? I mean, if we don't ask that question and take that step, then we've fundamentally truncated the discipleship process to a God and I time sort of experience. And so, we've made the cross a single pole rather than two. So, so as I think about as it's often called, the parable of the Good Samaritan, it's certainly shocking on a number of levels. Jesus doesn't answer the question directly. So he, instead of giving a simple answer saying, you should love your enemy, or you should love all people, or something kind of simple and trite, he answers with a story. And I think that's helpful for us because a lot of times we're asked a lot of questions about our Christian faith. What does it mean to do X, Y, and Z, or in a discipleship setting? And you feel that pressure of having to be the person with all the answers. And like, I've got to give you this real short nugget, maybe with a bunch of Bible verses or something like that. And Jesus says, let me tell you a story. So he answers it a little differently in that way. Secondly, he doesn't quite give the answer we typically would give to a question like that. If somebody said to me, who should I love? Who's the neighbor that God's talking about? My gut reaction would just say, well, everybody's your neighbor. Anybody, love anybody. But Jesus does something really tactical there. He gives that story, but then he includes in that story a racial other, the Samaritan in this case, and so he gives him that character as an example. He gives a character of someone who's hurting in that story, and those two aspects of that story I think are helpful, because loving somebody who is a racial other from us means that my love toward them can't be something that's required or obligated. There's a sense in which, if there's somebody who's in my sphere of connections, who's like me, there's some anticipation of, well, of course you're going to care for that person. They're like you, they're family, they're connected in some way. And then loving somebody who's hurting is somebody who can't reward you. So they don't have the ability to compensate, to make things right. The example of love shows that we need to extend ourselves into the lives of those who can't reward us in return. So in other words, when Jesus answers that question of who is my neighbor, he's saying, well, it's that hurting person who doesn't look like you, isn't from your background. And if you love that person, if you're capable of doing that without reward, without any requirement, then you can love anyone. You can move beyond that. And then I think the third kind of shock in the thing is that the hero of the story isn't a Jewish rabbi. And I think, we've heard this story so many times that we kind of miss that. And instead the hero is the one that doesn't have the whole Bible. He's the one that actually has really bad theology, who it comes from a group of people that have done some bad things, been associated with a lot of bad people. So to me, the implications are from that, who is the hero? Well, um, there's a lot of privilege for those of us who have the Bible. Romans 3:1 says that the Jewish people had a special privilege before God, but because they had the scriptures, they knew God's moral law. But when we see this story, we're seeing that it's actually the pagan who puts the people who have the Bible to shame. So the pagan is the one that understands and perceives the moral law of God, the expectation that they need to show care and compassion and concern for the person who is hurt, alone. And so this person then extends himself incredibly generously, incredible love to care in that spot. And so there's this gut reaction to say, we need to push back, because how dare this person have the moral high ground on this issue? But when we do that, we're actually demonstrating exactly what Jesus was trying to say with this parable. So when you admit that the pagan has the moral high ground, that's a condemnation of yourself, because you don't only have the Bible outside, you have the Spirit inside. And when you react that way, you're showing that you're acting out of line with all the great responsibility that you have as a follower of Christ. So those are the shock values, I think, of the parable to me.
Yeah. And so those tensions between the Samaritans and the national Israel, as they would call themselves, I mean, that goes way back to the divided kingdoms in that time. Yeah. And so this is a long-standing division and looking down on them, literally, one looking down on the other, and of a division of something even more, even stronger than the bonds of nationalism. It has to do with the bonds of who our God is and who's worshiping God correctly.
Jesus dials up the pressure, at least on his disciples, on the people who are going to follow him, and basically says that, it's what you thought was kind of fulfilling the minimum basic requirements is not really what it looks like to love your neighbor. So if we're going to love our neighbors, it means we kind of have to take a step beyond just mere moral or the mere law, the mere obligations, and take it a step further into love, because that was what the law could never require us to do, but it showed us kind of the mere baseline.